I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at 3 more categories for the 2024 Oscar nominations. I'm going to go through and predict my thoughts, my 5 nominees, as well as some possible contenders for the best costume design, production design, and makeup and hairstyling categories. But if you're new to the series, that is what I do every single week. Earlier on in the season, we just did one full episode on some of the bigger categories, Best Actor, Best Actress, so go back and check my thoughts on those categories. But now that we're really in the thick of Oscar season, we're going to start to get the Golden Globes and Critics' Choice next couple of weeks. Now we're starting to get into these categories where there's 2 or even 3 categories in one video, like in this video. That means we're in the thick of Oscar season. You guys have been showing a lot of support for this channel, and now that we're really in the thick of things, there's going to be more than just one video a week, so please do subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those videos. For example, coming on Thursday of this week, I'm going to give my Golden Globe predictions for the nominations that are going to come out. Then when they happen on Monday or Sunday, I'm going to give my thoughts on that, and then Critics' Choice will also release their nominations. I'll give not predictions for those, but because there's so many categories, and there's 6 or sometimes 7 nominees per category, so it's kind of silly to predict it, because you just pick the top 6 and you'll probably be right. But I will react to those nominations and talk about snubs and surprises. So we're going to be doing, over the next couple of weeks, 2 videos a week at different times in the traditional Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. So it'll be best for you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those videos. And as always, you guys have been always showing a lot of support in terms of the comments, which I absolutely love. So please do comment below and let me know your thoughts on what you think is going to get nominated for these categories or for other categories, or to hear my thoughts on some modern releases and how they can play into the Oscar calendar, any stuff like that. I want to create an awesome film-loving, Oscar-loving community here on this channel, so please do contribute there. But this is going to be another long episode, so let's just jump into things right away, starting off with the best costume design category. My first pick is going to be Poor Things, and like I mentioned every week, I do think Poor Things is going to perform in terms of Oscar nominations similarly to Yorgos's last movie, The Favorite, and like that movie, this movie has a lot of unique costumes set in the Victorian era. So we have the sort of big dresses, oftentimes these sort of costume drama, think of a young Victoria or an Emma or something like that, will get nominated in this category. Now, this movie isn't a costume drama in the way that the young Victoria is, for example, but it does have those sort of big, larger costumes, particularly worn by Emma Stone, but it is sort of a weirder, unique take on it. The one thing that is maybe stopping this movie from winning is that it is from a first-time costume designer who's never been nominated before. And if you look at the 4 years in a row, the past 4 years, the winners of this category, Best Costume Design, have already won before. So this category, it really likes to nominate the same people over and over again and reward the same winners over and over again. So there may be a little bit of a, are we going to reward a newbie this time? Not necessarily. So there's a little bit of a concern there. But we'll talk about the winners a little bit later. I do think Best Picture, likely Best Picture nominee with a lot of costumes from this period, is likely to get nominated in this category, so expect Poor Things to get nominated. And then my number 2 pick, I'm going to go with Barbie. Keep this one short and say that it is a testament to the costumes in your film if people are wearing those costumes for Halloween the same year. I don't know about you, but I definitely saw a lot of Barbie costumes this year. The breadth of them, of Ken or Barbie, or Cowgirl Barbie, depends on which one you want to talk about. But just for the fact that this movie has the characters having the same name. There's a million Barbies and there's a million Kens, and the reason why you differentiate between them is because of the costumes. So for just contributing to the overall, liveliness and creativity of the film, costume designer Jacqueline Duran, who won for Greta Gerwig's last movie, Little Women, I expect to very easily get a nomination here. Then my third pick, I'm going to go with The Color Purple. And I did a lot of research and statistical analysis for this category because I think for this category and Best Production Design, it really does matter. And you have to sort of work and make your predictions for these 2 categories in conjunction, because there's not always as much overlap as you would think between the 2 categories. But just jumping in and focusing on the costume design element, one stat that I found interesting was in 4 out of the last 5 years, 4 out of the 5 nominees were past nominees. So what does that tell us? It tells us that pretty much every year, at least for the past 5 years, you can predict 4 out of the 5 nominees of your predictions have to probably go to past nominees, have to probably go to someone who's been nominated in the past. The same names we hear year and year again. Your Colleen Atwoods, your Sandy Powell's, Jacqueline Duran, Jacqueline West. These people do sort of Sandy Bevan show up year and year again. And yet, Poor Things has a first-time costume designer. The Color Purple here has Francine Jameson Tanchuk, who has never been nominated as well in this category. So maybe O'Connor, why are you already picking 2 out of your 5 nominees going to first-time costume designers, or first-time, someone who's never been nominated before, first-time nominees? The reason why I'm doing that is because you don't want to be super rigid to the stats. Okay, I recognize that for the last 5 years, 4 of the 5 nominees went to past nominees. But you don't want to negate a movie that's so obvious in my mind, like A Color Purple, for a nomination, just because it didn't follow a historical stat. But what you do want to do, and what I am doing with my next 2 predictions, is keeping that in mind. So instead of only picking one movie that comes from a first-time costume designer nominee, I went with 2, but I kept it at 2. I didn't go 3, I didn't go 4, I didn't, be reckless with that stat. I did want to honor it and recognize that this category likes to nominate the same people over and over again, but I didn't want to be super strict to only nominate one person and then negate a movie like The Color Purple when I really do think it's going to get nominated. So that's what you have to do with the Oscar stats and making your predictions, is to understand historical relevance, but still make your own adjustments to what makes sense for that year and tailor it to that year. But that being said, my next 2 nominees are from 2 past-time nominees, so I did want to recognize the stat, and I did want to be, acknowledging of that. But in terms of the movie itself, The Color Purple, period set, so you have a lot of those big dresses, which is really important. A very bright, colorful movie, of course, The Color Purple being a very indicative and important color within the film and within the story. So you have bright colors. Musicals do very well in this category. That's why Mary Poppins Returns or West Side Story have gotten nominated in the past in this category. So it's a musical, it's got lots of costumes, lots of dresses. I expect it to be a Best Picture nominee, and that always helps too. So for me, I looked at the film and it makes this perfect sense as a costume design type of a film, if this will resonate with the Oscars in the way I expect it to. So I wanted to put The Color Purple in my predictions because it's got all these things going for it. And then with my 4th prediction for this category, I went with Wonka. And I did another interesting stat that I pulled for this category, and I did some more digging, and you find out that in the past 5, 6, 7 years, really for the history of this category, but you want to keep it relatively recent for data analysis, I found that usually most of these nominees aren't necessarily beloved movies, and many times 2, 3, sometimes even 4 of the nominees are not Best Picture nominees. In so many of the other categories, it always helps to have your movie nominated for Best Picture. But in costume design, they'll go for sort of stranger, weirder movies that only have 1 nomination. Think of Cyrano, think of Mulan, think of Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. These weren't movies that were critically beloved, that got nominated for Best Picture, right? They were sort of maybe cusp movies, or movies that didn't get a lot of love, like Mulan, but had incredible costumes and had incredible technical work. And the Costume Designers Guild didn't care. And this branch, they still wanted to reward those movies. So I think that's important. Now, Wonka, at the time of recording, does not have its reviews come out, but we do have social media reactions. And from real reviewers that I saw, seem to enjoy the film. I don't think it's going to be 100% like a Paddington 2, Paul King's last film, but I do think this movie could be in the 70s and the 80s and be a well-liked movie. But I don't expect this to be nominated for Best Picture. So that's actually a good thing in this category, because it's still going to be well-liked, which indicates that it's going to be well-seen. It's a late Christmas release, so it's going to be top of mind in terms of its awareness. It's a musical, which, like I mentioned with The Color Purple, Mary Poppins Returns, West Side Story, they like to nominate musicals in this category. There's also bright colors. It's got the iconic costume of Willy Wonka that Gene Wilder originated, but then there's the Johnny Depp version. Now we have the Timothée Chalamet version. So there's iconic kind of costumes in the film. There's lots of costumes, bright, colorful costumes itself. This is from a past winner in this category, so it sort of checks off that box. So we have a past nominee, we have a musical. That helps. The fact that it probably won't get nominated nominated for Best Picture actually helps in this case, because they like to nominate movies like this, even if they're not nominated for Best Picture. If the costumes are great, they'll want to nominate it. So actually, the more I start to do research on Wonka, it really makes a lot of sense for this category. So regardless of reviews, I still think that this movie has a strong chance of getting nominated in this category, despite being in my 4th slot. And then in my 5th selection, I went with Killers of the Flower Moon. And this was a really tough decision to make, but ultimately I relied on that historical analysis, and I went, in this final slot, I've already chosen 2 first-time costume designer nominees. Let me choose somebody who is a past nominee. And I got that with Jacqueline West. And then I looked at Scorsese's other movies, other Oscar movies, and I went, well, do they get nominated for Best Costume Design? And actually, surprisingly, they do, particularly when it comes to his period films. So think, The Departed's not going to get nominated for costumes, but The Irishman will, or Aviator will, or Gangs of New York will, or Hugo will. So we have another Scorsese film set in a distinct, period piece. So that helps in terms of getting nominated for costumes, in terms of his track record. That's great. And then I also looked at my 5 nominees, and like I said at the top of the video, it matters to always look at the holistic amount of your nominees. Look at all 5. Do they make sense sort of as a unit, as it together? Is there only one past nominee? Is there sort of a right split? And if you look at this category, both this category and Best Production Design category, they usually like to split the average of 3 period films and then 2 fantasy or sci-fi films. So one year we'll get The Favorite and Black Panther, or another year we'll get Mank and Mulan, a period movie and a fantasy movie. And if you look at my 5 nominees, and I encourage you to look at your 5 as well, I have 2 fantasy movies, Wonka and Barbie, and I have 3 period movies in Killers of the Flower Moon, The Color Purple, and Poor Things. So that was important, that this movie was a period film from a 4-time nominee in Jacqueline West. That helps, that sort of adds to the stats as well, combined with the fact that Scorsese's movies do well in this category. There was too much going for it for me not to pick Killers of the Flower Moon. Okay, now quickly, some possible contenders. The first one being Priscilla. I could have chosen this instead of Killers of the Flower Moon because it's a period movie. It's all about the costumes of Priscilla, and so much of the movie is about her trying to feel pretty and dolled up for Elvis. But ultimately, there was a couple of things that I pushed me away from it. First being that it is from a first-time nominee, so that would sort of go against that stat. I also think that the costume designers don't love couture collaborations. A lot of the dresses and costumes in this film were in collaboration with Chanel, and we've seen movies like House of Gucci, which had the collaboration with Gucci, or even United States versus Billie Holiday, who had a collaboration with Dior, I think it was. They didn't do well in terms of getting nominations, so there may be a stigma against costume designers using sort of couture collaborations within their films. Maybe it's seen as cheating, I'm not necessarily sure, but maybe there's a bit of a stigma against that, which pushes Priscilla on the out. And then my other possible contender was Napoleon, and this could fit a lot of the categories that I predicted earlier. It's not a Best Picture nominee, it's from a pastime winner, it's a period piece. You could think, Connor, why isn't this nominated then? Well, the one thing that concerns me is the costume designer, Janty Yates, hasn't done it really as well at the Oscars as I wanted her to. You think of her, and she's a legendary costume designer. She's worked with Ridley Scott a bunch of times. But then you go, well, how many times has she been nominated? And only once for Gladiator. And you start to think of other Ridley Scott movies, and you go, why wasn't she nominated for American Gangster? Why wasn't she nominated for House of Gucci, or The Last Duel, or Exodus, Gods and Kings? These are all costume design type movies. So maybe there's just a bit of a stigma against the Ridley Scott films because a lot of the costumes are very dirty and muted and gray. So the Guild and the costume designers branch doesn't appreciate that. House of Gucci should have been a slam dunk nomination. It's a movie about clothes. So the fact that it didn't even get nominated concerns me about Janty Yates' favorability within the branch, which leads me to put it on the outside. Okay, now jumping over into my predictions for the Best Production Design category. My first pick is going to go to Poor Things. Similar to my costume design argument, this is a very unique, different world that they've built. The one knock is that it is from a first-time nominee production designer who's never been nominated before, which never helps necessarily. But it is from a Best Picture nominee. It does have a unique, interesting, different, crazy world. And like I mentioned earlier, I expect this movie to do similarly to The Favorite, and The Favorite got nominated in this category, so I expect a sort of continuation there. My other prediction is going to be Barbie. If you've seen this movie, you expect it to get nominated in this category as well. From 6-time nominees, Katie Spencer and Sarah Greenwood. There's a lot of big real sets that they built in the film. So much of the movie has to do with the houses and the sets of Barbie's dream world, and then it turns into sort of the Ken land and the Ken's version, and how that sort of changes the world that they've created. So much about it is the real sets, about the creativity of the world that they've built in this movie, and I think that the production designers will appreciate that. Then another sort of lock of a nomination for me is Killers of the Flower Moon. This is from legendary production designer Jack Fisk, who's worked with legends like Paul Thomas Anderson and David Lynch and Terrence Malick a lot. So getting him here in a Scorsese movie was a real treat, and I think there's a lot of respect for him as a production designer. And then you think of the movie, and there's a lot of great real-life sets that they built. Think of King's house, or think of the Freemason room that they enter into in a certain moment of the movie without spoiling anything. Very well designed. Period movies often do well in this category because you're recreating a lot of things, and this is a big-scale recreation. But as I'm choosing this movie, I wanted to note the connection between this category and the best costume design category, which I teased earlier, but I'm going to go into a deep dive now. And this is important because you may think, oh yeah, right, the costume design category and the production design category, they're pretty similar. There's probably a lot of overlap in those categories. And you'd be wrong. As a matter of fact, every year there's only 2 or maybe 3 overlaps in this category. They actually have pretty distinctive nominations every single year, and it's an Oscar trap, a classic one every single year, where people go 4 for 4 in overlap. They go Wonka in both categories, Killers of the Flower Moon both categories, Oppenheimer, The Color Purple, Poor Things, Barbie. It's very easy to go both categories for a movie because it makes sense. The costume design and production design, they're very intertwined. But the way the Oscar history happens is that these are 2 separate guilds. You have to remind yourself of that. 2 separate branches of the Academy. And they like different movies, and they continually show us that there isn't that much overlap between the 2 categories. So when making your predictions, look at your 5 for costume, look at your 5 for production, and try to make sure that there's not a lot of overlap. 2, maybe 3. And already, with Poor Things and Barbie, and now Killers of the Flower Moon, I have 3 overlapping. So what do? I make sure that my next 2 picks aren't overlapping. And then I do that in conjunction, and I try to think, okay, what movies are more production design movies, or what movies are more costume design movies? So I look at the movie like The Color Purple, and I go, it's more of a costume design movie than a production design movie. Lots of costumes, bright and colorful. The production design, a lot of times they're outside in the field, so there's not as much production design going on. So I go, okay, that's going to get nominated in the costume design category. Same thing with Oppenheimer. I go, that's an obvious to me production design movie. Nolan's movies always get nominated in production design. Is it obviously costume design? Not necessarily. It may overperform in that category, but it's not from a past nominee or anything, so that kind of hurts it too. So I sort of left that on the outset. So look at your 5, and I really do recommend not having too much overlap between the 2 categories, because Oscar history and these branches tell us that they don't like to do that. So you have to sort of keep that in mind when making your predictions. With that being said, my 4th nomination is Oppenheimer. And even though it's in my 4th slot, I still do feel strongly that this will get nominated in this category, because you have new production designer working with Christopher Nolan, Ruth Jong, who's never been nominated before, so that kind of hurts it in a way. But Nolan's past production designer was Nathan Crowley, and Nathan Crowley has been nominated 5 times just for Christopher Nolan movies. He's nominated 6 times total, but 5 of the 6 nominations went to Christopher Nolan movies. Now that may be an instance where they just love Nathan Crowley, and they won't nominate Ruth here because he's they really like Nathan Crowley, and the reason why Nolan's movies always got nominated is because of Crowley. I'm a little bit dubious of that thinking. I think Nathan Crowley got nominated 5 times for Christopher Nolan movies and only 1 other time for non-Christopher Nolan movies. because they love Christopher Nolan and because they love his sets and the realism that he's dedicated to, and that means a lot of building of things and a lot of building of sets. So I think that sort of same thinking and continuation is going to happen here with Oppenheimer. They built Los Alamos in the desert, and it looks like a real functioning town. There's lots of locations in this movie, so there's a lot of design sets that the production designer had to do. So I think there's a respect for that. So I'm betting more on the fact that people like Nolan and his movies and his design sets more than they were like, no, we actually only like Nathan Crowley. That's the reason why we nominate him every year. I'm sure there's a combination of that, but I still think Oppenheimer, frontrunner for Best Picture, Nolan's other movies get nominated for Best Production Design, just makes sense to put it in here. So even though it's in my fourth slot, I went pretty quickly. I went Killers, guaranteed, Oppenheimer guaranteed, Poor Things, Barbie. I felt all good about those four getting nominations. And like I said, that influenced my predictions for Best Costume Design as well. And then my fifth pick, this is my wild card pick. This is the one that I don't see a lot of people predicting, but when I looked at it, it made a lot of sense for me. And that's Napoleon. And I picked it because I'm not having it in my Best Costume Design category. It also makes sense to me more as a production design type of movie. There are a lot of sets. There's the battlefield. There's the royal sets. It is like Killers in a way. Killers of the Flower Moon, a big budgeted auteur historical drama. And the production designer here is Arthur Max, who is Ridley Scott's longtime production designer, like J.T. Yates was a longtime costume designer for Ridley Scott. The difference between them, though, is that Arthur Max does get nominated for Ridley Scott movies. He got nominated for The Martian, where the costumes weren't nominated. He got nominated for American Gangster, where the costumes weren't nominated. So when we look at Ridley's movies that are sort of Oscar movies or sort of fringe Oscar movies, we often look at the technical mastery of it, and production design makes a lot of sense to me. Because this is a movie in Napoleon that I don't think, it's a late release, so it's going to get some Oscar buzz. I don't think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture. It didn't have the critical reviews needed. But it is a movie that has great technical appreciation, and it reminds me of a lot of fringe movies that we've seen in past years, like a Babylon, like a First Man, like a News of the World. Released late movies, technical mastery movies that don't get nominated for Best Picture, but they are released late enough into the Oscar season and have enough craft and are from respected auteurs that they ultimately get some technical appreciation. So if you look at a movie like First Man, which got visual effects, production design, and sound, I could see Napoleon doing a very similar 3 nominations as well for those 3 categories. Makes sense as the sort of type of historical epic. Plus, this is a war movie, and war movies do very well in this category. Think of Dunkirk, think of 1917, think of All Quiet on the Western Front. They all got nominated. All Quiet on the Western Front won. So Napoleon, another war movie, historical epic from Pastime nominee. There's a lot of things going for it, and because I looked at my predictions and I'm always trying to go for 100%. So I wanted to have not as much overlap, and Napoleon felt right in that regard. So I know not a lot of people are predicting it, but I think you should seriously consider Napoleon in this category. Then some possible contenders. My first one is The Color Purple, which I mentioned. More of a costume design movie than a production design movie, but it does have a certain big sets like the house, and it is a musical, so you often have to cut to the wide and show the sort of built sets and all the different types of people that are there. So there is some design and art directed parts of the movie which are quite impressive. I haven't seen it, but that's what the reviews say, and looking at it from the trailers, I expect that to be. But I nominated for Best Costume Design, so I didn't want to nominate for Best Production Design. And then my other possible contender, Wonka, for a similar reason, I nominated for Best Production for Best Costume Design, so I didn't want to nominate here for Best Production Design. But this is from Nathan Crowley, who we mentioned is a 6-time nominee, often for Christopher Nolan's movies. So maybe he gets nominated based on name value alone. But I think Wonka's probably still not strong enough of an Oscar movie to get nominated in costumes and production design. But like The Color Purple is a musical, and maybe they'll appreciate the sort of grandiosity of some of the sets that are built. Okay, now jumping over into the final category I want to talk about in this video, which is the Best Makeup and Hairstyling category. Starting off with my first prediction, which is going to be Maestro. And I talked about this already on my Best Actress video, the connection between the acting category and the makeup winner of this category, because for 6 years in a row, the winner of the Best Makeup and Hairstyling Award had an actor nominated for either Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor or what have you. So think of last year, Brendan Fraser wins for Best Lead Actor and The Whale wins for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. Or a couple years ago, Vice won for Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and that award got nominated because they transformed Christian Bale into Dick Cheney. Christian Bale gets nominated for Best Lead Actor. There's a direct correlation between these two categories. And what do we have this year in Maestro? I expect Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan to get nominated in their respective categories. And at the end of the day, the reason why there's a correlation is because this is less so a makeup and hairstyling award and more so a best prosthetics award. This guild loves to reward movies that transform famous people into other famous people. And in this movie, you have the transformation of these two characters that look like these two famous people during their lives, but also there's old age makeup as they age later on into the film. So there is a real prosthetic work that's being done in the film. And this is from makeup artist Kazuhiro, who has won recently a couple of times in this category, so he's very well liked. So I expect him to help the movie get nominated as well. Then my second pick, I'm going to go with Poor Things. And a lot of the reasons why I picked Maestro, I'm picking Poor Things. This is not based on real people, but you have a main character in Willem Dafoe who has serious prosthetics and sort of this scarred face. So immediately when you think of the film, you think of Willem Dafoe and his character and the prosthetics that go on within the film, so that's important. And I also expect Poor Things to have multiple acting nominations, which helps when there's a correlation between the makeup and hairstyling category and the acting categories. Very unique, interesting world as well. So there's some sort of kooky hairstyles and different hairstyles that Emma Stone's character will have in the film without spoiling anything. Plus, this is a Best Picture nominee. And before, when this category only had 3 nominees, you would see stranger movies, get nominated and win. Suicide Squad won, or you'd see Border, or some of these movies sort of slip in that aren't Best Picture nominees, that are underseen movies. But when they expanded from 3 to 5, we started to see more Best Picture movies get nominated. I don't think 1917 would have gotten nominated had there only been 3 slots. I don't think Mank would have gotten nominated had there only been 3 slots. So when we look at sort of the 4 and 5 category, who's going to get nominated, oftentimes it goes to a Best Picture nominee, a movie that's just well liked, and I think Poor Things will sort of follow in that trajectory. And then my third prediction, I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and this is a very simple logic. The first one got nominated, the second one almost got nominated, got multiple and won Makeup and Hairstyling Guild Awards, but because there was only 3 slots, sort of was left on the outside. But now with 5 slots, I think it will get in. Guardians as a series, it has multiple main characters, Drax, Gamora, who are fully enclosed in makeup. There's a lot of sort of prosthetics and makeup to transform people into characters rather than relying on a bunch of CGI. So there's just for the breadth and the amount of makeup in this movie, I think the branch will really appreciate that, the amount of work and the amount of artisans that work on this film. So a sci-fi movie, like I mentioned, they've rewarded superhero movies in the past with something like Suicide Squad, so I wouldn't be surprised if they nominated Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 here. And then in my 4th slot, I'm going to go with Golda. And you may be asking, what? What is this movie? I've never heard of this movie. This is not going to get nominated. Well, like I said earlier, the makeup category doesn't necessarily always nominate Best Picture nominees. They will nominate these sort of stranger, fringe movies. And Golda, I think, makes a lot of sense because, if you don't know, it's recently a historical biopic about Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. And the movie is sort of an old person movie with middling critical reviews. Like I said, I don't think that really matters. If anything, it helps it because the makeup branch every year will nominate some sort of lesser critically beloved movie. But it's got a lot of things going for it. First of all, it's got famous people transforming into famous people. You have Helen Mirren transforming into Golda. You have Leah Shriver transforming into Henry Kissinger. That's the first reason. Number 2, it's recently released, so it's got top of mind awareness, so it's not like it's a forgotten movie. It's been recently released. And number 3, Henry Kissinger just died, and this movie has a key character being Liev Schreiber is playing Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is in this movie. So, that may be something that doesn't matter by the time Oscar voting happens, but I do think that, this movie has more relevance today than it did a week ago. So people are going to be going, oh yeah, wasn't there some new movie where Liev Schreiber plays Kissinger? Oh, I guess I'll see that because Kissinger's just died and I'm reading about him, and oh, there we go. I'll see the movie. And the more people see the movie, the more people go, hey, you know what, that makeup was actually pretty good. There's a lot of prosthetics and there's a lot of transformative makeup going on here. So even though it is a beloved movie, hey, maybe we'll nominate it for makeup. So it's a little bit of a fringe movie. It's a little bit of a wild card, risky pick. But I do think Golda is a serious contender here. But it's also a movie that could not show up on any short list. We'll see those eventually, and then I'll have egg on my face. But I don't know. I still think Golda has a real shot. And then in my final selection, I wanted to go with Oppenheimer. And I resisted it a bit at first. And I go, there's not really a lot of makeup in Oppenheimer. They're not going to nominate this, are they? But then I thought about it, and there's a lot of things going for it. First of all, Best Picture frontrunners usually over-index and over-perform in terms of nominations. Power of the Dog, Roma, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Every year they surprise in categories we didn't think they would get nominated. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once, last year getting into something like Score. So that helps. That is the Best Picture frontrunner. And then you think of the movie and you go, well, at the end of the movie, there is the sort of prosthetics of transforming Emily Blunt and Cillian Murphy's characters into the older versions of their characters. So there is prosthetics going on there and old age makeup. And then you think of Robert Downey Jr.'s character and you go, well, yeah, he's got that sort of pulled back hairline and he's graying and, got a wig on. And, well, I guess that, there's a main character with significant makeup and hairstyling going on, so that's memorable. And who knows, maybe there's the connection too with the acting categories. I think Robert Downey Jr. is going to get nominated, Cillian Murphy's going to get nominated, so you have a connection between the acting categories. You have a main character who does have technically a hairstyling piece, and then you have the old age makeup later on in the film, and you go, yeah, it actually does have a lot of makeup, and it is Best Picture frontrunner, and they usually overperform in some of these categories that don't make obvious sense. And I could see Oppenheimer definitely getting in for a makeup nomination. So I do think that you don't sort of blatantly go, oh yeah, it only has that makeup at the end. They're not going to nominate that. Do a little bit more of the research, hear my thoughts, hear my pitch, and I think you should consider it for that fifth slot. Then some possible contenders I want to mention. First one being Priscilla, who, there's a key scene in the film where her water breaks, she's about to give birth, and while they're all getting the car ready, she's sort of doing her makeup and doing her hair. And so much of the movie is about being dolled up for Elvis, so there is sort of a connection with a story with that. If Priscilla gets on some shortlists, I'd be more willing to predict it, but at the end of the day, I think this guild has shown us time and time again that they like makeup movies and prosthetics more than they like great hairstyles, and Priscilla is mostly a movie about sort of the unique, bold 60s hairstyles that Priscilla has. And then my other possible contender is Nyad, which I think was a stronger contender earlier on in the season. I think it maybe peaked a little bit too early. I don't know if it's going to have the staying power and the resonance later on in the season. But it does have some interesting prosthetics in terms of the swimming scenes when her face is kind of puffed up. But aside from that, there's not a lot of prosthetics. And even when you think of the film, like when I think about the film, I just think of Jodie Foster and Annette Bening without any makeup on, sort of going back and forth, not in the pool, not in the water. So I don't think people will immediately think of Nyad and think of those prosthetics, even though there is some interesting makeup going on in those swimming scenes. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on these three categories. Stay tuned to later on this week. Subscribe to the channel so you can hear my thoughts and my predictions for the nominations of the 2024 Golden Globes. That will be a lot of fun and another long video. So if you appreciate things, always like it and comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.